Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to drift back to a spring morning in 1796, northern Italy, where the Alps breathe mist into a valley full of hungry soldiers and damp gunpowder. You can almost smell the mix of wet leather, sweat, and the faint bitterness of smoke. Somewhere in that haze stands a short, restless man with fire in his eyes and holes in his boots. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte, and at this moment, you probably won't survive this if you're one of his men, because the only thing hungrier than their stomachs is their general's ambition. The story begins with you, standing ankle-deep in the mud of northern Italy. March 1796. You're part of the Army of Italy, a ragtag band of French soldiers who've been promised glory, but mostly gotten rain. The uniforms are torn, muskets misfire, and dinner is a rumor that travels faster than the wind. Horses are bones with saddles. Men sleep beside their weapons for warmth. Then one morning word spreads a new general has arrived. He's only 26. Some call him the Little Corporal. You snort at the name because in this army even the bravest men look like ghosts. But when he rides in, you see something different. He's small, yes, but his eyes move like a hawk's, scanning everything. When he speaks, his Corsican accent cracks like thunder. "Soldiers," he says, "you are naked, ill-fed, but rich plains and cities await you just beyond those mountains. You don't know it yet, but that speech, short, sharp, and burning, will feed you more than bread ever could." Napoleon's first problem isn't the Austrians. It's his own army. They don't trust Paris and they don't trust him. So he starts with small victories. Better rations, faster marches, no endless parades. "War," he mutters one night, "is about movement, not medals." He slashes through old paperwork like he's cutting weeds. Officers who complain find themselves quietly replaced. A few grumble that he's arrogant. More whisper that he might actually win. Historians are still debating whether Napoleon truly cared for his men or simply understood them as pieces on a board. But if you'd been there, you'd have seen the difference. When he walked the camp at dusk, boots sinking into the same mud as yours, he'd stop to touch a musket, taste the stew, or ask a soldier his name. It wasn't kindness, it was calculation with a heartbeat. By night, the hills echo with the sound of drills. You march until your legs scream, but something strange happens. You stop thinking about bread and start thinking about battle. He's teaching you to move like lightning, to hit and vanish before the enemy even blinks. There's an odd rumor spreading among the men that Napoleon never sleeps. Some swear they've seen his lamp burning all night, maps scattered like constellations across his desk. Others joke that he keeps time itself hostage. "Maybe that's why he's short," someone whispers. The hours took a few inches. Laughter ripples through the camp, the kind that hides fear. And yet, there's magic in the air. You can feel it in the way the wind shifts before dawn, in the way the horses lift their heads as if they sense destiny trotting by. One evening, as you're cleaning your musket, he stops beside you. "You look tired," he says quietly. You mumble, "We're soldiers, sir." He nods once. "Yes, but soon you'll be conquerors." And somehow that single sentence makes your hands steadier. The first skirmishes are messy, ambushes in mountain passes, rain turning trails into rivers. You're half blind in fog, hearing cannon echo through the valleys like thunder inside a drum. But Napoleon is everywhere, riding ahead, shouting orders, sketching routes on muddy maps. He fights not from a throne, but from a saddle. "He's mad," one officer says. "Maybe," another replies, "but so were all the prophets." You notice the change almost overnight. Where the old generals waited for orders, Napoleon creates them. When supplies run low, he doesn't whine to Paris. He raids the enemy depots. When morale falters, he doesn't preach about glory. He points to the horizon and says, "There lies dinner. There's an old detail you'll never forget." One night, lightning flashes over the camp, illuminating his face as he studies a tattered map. Rain falls in sheets, the fire sputters, and still he stands unmoving. You realize then that this man isn't chasing comfort. He's chasing immortality. A few days later, you march again, this time toward the Ligurian hills. The path twists between olive groves and ruined villas. You hear the distant boom of cannons, Austrians somewhere ahead. Men mutter prayers, some for victory, some for food. Napoleon rides past, cloak snapping in the wind. "Soldiers," he calls, "you have been ill-clothed and ill-fed, but I will lead you to the richest plains in the world. For once, no one laughs. By the time dusk falls, you fought your first real battle under his command. It's chaos. Musket smoke thick as fog, the smell of sulfur burning your throat. At one point, you stumble on a fallen drummer boy and drag him to safety, your ears ringing. Later, you find out Napoleon ordered his own horse shot when it panicked, choosing to lead on foot instead. He walks among the men afterward, blood on his coat, eyes alight. That night, as the camp quiets, you realize something unsettling. You're not afraid anymore. The mud is still there, the hunger too, but beneath it all hums a new kind of music. The rhythm of a commander who can turn misery into motion. Historians would later call this the birth of the Napoleonic spirit. The belief that victory wasn't about numbers but about will. You don't care for the theories. You just know that for the first time, hope has the shape of a man with a telescope and a crooked grin. The stars glitter above the mountains. Someone starts humming a tune, off-key but oddly comforting. You lie back, rifle by your side, and think about the strange, furious little man who might just change the world. And if you listen closely, beyond the rustle of tents and snoring, you can almost hear him whisper to himself in the dark. One day, they'll all know my name. Dawn spills over the hills like melted gold, and you're already marching. Your boots stick to the road, every step pulling up more of Italy's muddy heart. Napoleon rides ahead, silent, his greatcoat whipping behind him like a flag. You can tell he's thinking, not about the next meal, but the next move. The army of Italy isn't supposed to win. On paper, you're the weakest of France's forces, left to distract the Austrians while real generals fight elsewhere. But Napoleon doesn't believe in paper. We'll make history, he tells you one morning, even if it's written in mud. Your first real taste of this history comes at Montenotte. It's not a grand battlefield, more a tangle of ridges, fog, and narrow paths where you can't tell friend from foe. You and your comrades crawl up steep slopes under musket fire, your fingers gripping wet rock. Somewhere above, Napoleon shouts orders like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. He's everywhere, left, right, shouting, pointing, sometimes laughing as cannonballs burst nearby. Faster, he calls. They can't shoot what they can't see. It's reckless, brilliant, terrifying. And it works. The Austrians break, not because they're weaker, but because they're bewildered. Later, historians will call Montenotte a textbook example of maneuver warfare. You just remember the feeling of charging through smoke, lungs on fire, heart hammering like a drum. When the firing stops, the silence feels deafening. You're still shaking, covered in sweat and soot. Napoleon rides past, his face calm, almost serene. You fought well, he says. Now let's go finish the job. And just like that, you move again. No long rest, no drawn-out speeches. He doesn't give you time to realize how tired you are. He knows momentum is everything, the art of never letting fear catch up. At Lodi, you meet the bridge. Wooden planks, narrow, guarded by Austrian cannons on the far bank. You stare at it in disbelief. To cross is madness. The Austrians are waiting, guns loaded, the river below swollen and roaring. Napoleon stands at the head of the column, eyes fixed on the far side. "Who will follow me?" he shouts. You can't tell if he's joking. Then before anyone can answer, he grabs a flag and starts forward. It's chaos. The air filled with smoke, men shouting, the bridge shaking under cannon fire. You're halfway across before you realize you've followed him. Musket clutched, boots sliding on blood and splinters. For a moment, you glimpse him through the haze, waving the tricolor and shouting over the roar, "Forward!" France watches you. Later, people will say he wasn't really on the bridge, that it was just a legend to boost morale. Historians are still debating whether he actually led that charge. But you were there, and you'll swear to your dying day that you saw him standing amid the storm, fearless, or maybe just too young to know fear. When the smoke clears, the bridge is yours. The Austrians retreat, leaving behind their guns, wagons, and disbelief. You're trembling, ears ringing, but when Napoleon rides past, you see something new in his eyes. Not relief, not pride, but calculation. He's thinking 10 moves ahead. That night, as the men celebrate, you find yourself beside a campfire, watching sparks drift into the stars. Someone jokes that Napoleon must be blessed by Mars himself. Another laughs. Maybe he just hasn't realized he's mortal yet. You chuckle, but quietly. You're not sure which one's true. Napoleon walks through the camp with his hands clasped behind his back, glancing at the stars. Speed, he murmurs, is the soul of war. You wonder if he's talking to you or to himself. Over the next weeks, the lightning campaign becomes legend. Town after town falls before you can even learn their names. The enemy never knows where you'll strike next. Napoleon divides his army into swift columns, each moving like a strand of wind. You march by moonlight, fight by sunrise, rest only when the map allows it. You notice his tactics, simple but terrifyingly precise. He studies terrain like an artist studies light. A hill isn't just a hill. It's an ambush waiting to happen. A river isn't an obstacle. It's a weapon if you use it right. He sends cavalry in arcs that look random until, suddenly, the enemy finds themselves surrounded. There's one odd detail that sticks in your mind. Before every battle, Napoleon sketches rough maps on whatever's nearby. Sometimes parchment, sometimes the ground, once even a soldier's drum. He draws with his finger fast, muttering numbers, arrows, and times. Then he stands, nods, and says, "It's already won." You can't help laughing. Already won? You whisper to your friend, "We haven't even started." But every time somehow he's right. Victory after victory rolls in. Dago, Mondovi, Castiglione. Each one faster than the last, as if the world itself is bending to his rhythm. The soldiers start calling him Le Petit Tonnerre, the Little Thunder, not because of his height, but because he strikes before anyone hears him coming. One night, after a particularly long march, you find yourself half asleep on your pack, listening to him dictate a report. His aide writes feverishly, trying to keep up. "We have defeated the Austrians in detail," Napoleon says, "and the French soldier is invincible when led with skill." You grin into your sleeve. When led with skill, that's his way of saying, when led by me. But you can't deny it anymore. The army that was once starving and broken now moves like one creature. Lean, fast, dangerous. You used to fight because you had to. Now, you fight because you believe. Still, in quieter moments, when the drums are silent and the fires burn low, you wonder where it will end. Can anyone move this fast forever? Even lightning must strike the ground eventually. You look over at Napoleon's tent. The candle inside still burns, his shadow pacing back and forth. Does he ever sleep? Maybe he's afraid to. Afraid the world will forget him if he stops. And as you drift towards sleep, you think of the bridge again, the roar of the river, the smoke, the sight of that little man standing where no one else dared. You smile, half dreaming. Maybe history really was written in mud. Morning drips down from the hills like pale honey. The air smells of wet grass and horse sweat, and somewhere a drummer boy yawns into his instrument before the day begins. You're no longer the same soldier who trudged into Italy weeks ago. Your uniform's still torn, your boots still leaking, but you've learned to move like water, to fight like wind. And it's all because of him, the man who turns maps into magic. Napoleon's victories have given France more than land. They've given her headlines. Paris papers call him the Young Lion, the Italian miracle, even the thunderbolt of the Republic. The soldiers pass the newspapers around like love letters, grinning at the sketches of their short, sharp general. But war isn't all cannons and cheers. It's also conversation. Between battles, Napoleon spends his days talking, writing, persuading. He's discovered a weapon even stronger than artillery, the human mind. You watch him work one afternoon in a dusty Italian town square. Local leaders have gathered. Priests in heavy robes, merchants with fat purses, and one or two nobles pretending not to be afraid. Napoleon steps forward, hands clasped behind his back. His voice is soft, almost polite. "Gentlemen," he begins, "France does not come as a conqueror, but as a liberator." It's a lie, of course, or at least a stretch. You see the muskets glinting behind him, the French flags fluttering over the rooftops. But the man's words flow like a lullaby, smooth and irresistible. Within an hour, the town's officials are offering him keys, feasts, and flowery speeches. History, he later mutters, is written by whoever drafts the surrender terms. Historians are still debating whether Napoleon was a genuine believer in liberty or merely its best salesman. You don't know, All you know is that he could talk the snow off the Alps if he wanted to. Sometimes, at night, he dictates proclamations by candlelight, his shadow dancing on the tent wall like a second self. "Soldiers," he writes, "you have conquered the finest plains in Europe. You have given France new glory." The words are pure fire, and by morning copies are nailed to trees and church doors across Italy. You read one aloud by the campfire, and even the grumpiest old grenadier grins. He understands something most generals don't, that men fight best for stories. Not pay, but behind the charm and speeches, you begin to notice something else, a flicker of doubt, a faint loneliness. Sometimes when the camp grows quiet, you'll find him standing apart, staring into the distance, muttering in Corsican. You catch fragments about destiny, power, maybe love. Once you swear you hear him whisper, "They follow me now." But for how long? He doesn't drink much, doesn't joke, rarely sleeps. Once, during a rare moment of calm, a young officer tries to compliment him. "General, you're like Alexander reborn." Napoleon smirks. "Alexander died young. I have plans to live longer." You all laugh, but his eyes don't. Still, when he wants to, he can be almost funny. During a rainy night march, an aide slips and falls face first into the mud. Everyone bursts out laughing, even Napoleon. "Rise, Lieutenant," he says dryly. "You've just kissed Italy." 3 jokes later, the rain feels warmer. The campaign shifts south toward Lombardy, and the war changes shape. It's less about ambushes now, more about negotiation. Cities surrendering before you even unpack the cannon. Milan opens its gates to you as if welcoming an old friend. The people cheer. The churches ring their bells. You march through cobblestone streets lined with spectators. Roses falling from balconies, the air heavy with perfume and hope. And there he is, riding at the front, chin high, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time, he looks like more than a soldier. He looks... Gull. That night you're quartered in a noble's villa. Marble floors, gilded mirrors, real food on actual plates. It feels unreal after months of mud. You catch a glimpse of Napoleon in a candlelit room, surrounded by maps and diplomats. He listens, nods, occasionally interrupts with a word or gesture. When they leave, he stands by the window for a long time, gazing at the city lights below. You realize something quietly dangerous. He's no longer fighting for France. He's fighting for history. Do you think he'll ever stop? You ask a fellow soldier. "Stop what?" "Winning." Your friend shrugs. "If he does, he'll just find another kind of battle." You laugh, but it's uneasy laughter. There's something about the way he moves now, measured, deliberate. The once hungry young general has learned to feed on power itself. Still, his genius for persuasion doesn't fade. When a nearby Italian republic hesitates to join France, he writes them a letter so warm it could melt iron. "Our nations share the same ideals," it says. "Together we will enlighten the world." 2 weeks later, their flags fly side by side. One evening, after an exhausting day of drills, you find him sitting by the fire, writing again. "What now, sir?" You ask half-jokingly. "You've already conquered half of Italy." He looks up, eyes gleaming. "Half? Then I have work to do," you grin. "Don't you ever rest?" He chuckles softly. "Rest? I'll rest when Europe does." You don't know whether to admire him or be afraid. Before you sleep, you overhear 2 officers whispering. "He'll be more than a general someday." "A king?" "No, something worse or better." Can't decide. You close your eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the camp, the distant church bells of Milan, and the scratch of his pen still moving long after midnight. You think about his words, his fire, his strange stillness. Maybe this is how empires begin. Not with drums, but with sentences. Somewhere outside, lightning flashes over the hills. You imagine it striking his tent, not to kill him, but to recharge him, because somehow that feels possible. You wake up in silk sheets, and for a brief, guilty moment, you almost forget the smell of the battlefield. The campaign has shifted again. No longer endless marches and sudden charges, but banquets, treaties, and whispered politics. The army of Italy, once starving and barefoot, now occupies marble halls. The scent of victory is thick, almost suffocating. Napoleon's headquarters in Lombardy looks less like a war camp and more like a palace. Velvet drapes, candlelight flickering on polished stone, guards standing at ease instead of alert. You walk through corridors where once kings now bow to your general, and you wonder if history has already forgotten who's supposed to be in charge. Napoleon sits at a desk beneath a portrait of Caesar, quill in hand writing yet another letter to Paris. He's dressed simply, gray coat, black boots, but his presence fills the room like thunder trapped in a bottle. When an aide enters to report that supplies are late, Napoleon doesn't shout. He just looks up and says quietly, "Then find someone faster." The aide salutes and vanishes like smoke. He's changed. The restless, hungry energy that once drove him is still there, but it's colder now, more controlled. You can almost hear the hum of ambition under his calm voice. Later that evening, you help set up a dinner for visiting Italian officials. The table gleams with crystal and gold, but the talk is sharper than the silverware. Napoleon laughs easily, jokes about the weather, quotes poetry, but behind every word is a trap, a strategy, a calculation. You realize that this is his new battlefield. Diplomacy, he tells one of the generals, is just war by other means. But here the bullets are compliments you can't help but smile. He's half charming, half terrifying. As the evening deepens, he excuses himself from the table, claiming he needs air. You follow him to the balcony, where the city lights sprawl below like fallen stars. "Look at it," he says softly. "All of this was built by men with dreams, and all of it can be taken by men with stronger ones." You glance at him. "You mean yours?" He laughs, a quiet, tired sound. "Mine. For now." It's the first time you hear uncertainty in his voice. For a moment, he doesn't look like a general or a legend, just a man staring down from a tower, wondering what comes next. Historians are still debating whether this was when Napoleon began to believe he was destined for empire. Some say Lombardy changed him, that the applause, the titles, the taste of control sank too deep. Others argue he was always like this, merely waiting for the world to notice. You can't say. You just know that somehow the campaign feels different now. The soldiers still march, still fight, but the battles are fewer and the speeches quieter. Victory has become routine, and routine breeds unease. There's one odd moment that sticks in your mind. Late one night, the general summons a few officers to his chamber. He spreads a map across the table, not of Italy, but of Europe. His finger traces north, Vienna, Berlin, even London. "We could change everything," he murmurs. "One day they'll have to learn to speak French to understand the future." Someone chuckles nervously. "Ambitious, sir." Napoleon looks up, eyes hard. Ambition is a virtue when it succeeds. A chill runs through the room. The next day, news arrives from Paris. Politicians complaining, rivals scheming. Napoleon reads the letters in silence, then folds them neatly and sets them aside. "They think I serve them," he says at last. "Let them keep thinking it." You realize with a jolt that he's no longer fighting for France's glory. France is fighting for his. And yet, even with that edge of arrogance, there's something magnetic about him. One afternoon, you see him stop by a fountain where children are playing. He kneels, speaks softly, hands one of them his hat to wear. The boy beams. For a few seconds, the mask slips, and you glimpse the warmth that made men follow him into fire. Then, as quickly as it appears, it's gone. That evening, rumors spread through camp that he's considering marrying into French high society. Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow with influence and charm. The men joke that their general, conqueror of Italy, has finally been conquered himself. Imagine, one laughs, a woman bringing him to his knees. Napoleon hears the joke and grins. "If she does," he says, "it'll be the most strategic surrender of my life." The laughter lingers long after he's left, but in the quieter corners of the camp, not everyone is laughing. Some officers fear he's becoming too powerful, too famous. One night, as you share a bottle of sour wine, a captain mutters, "Mark my words, this man won't stop until he crowns himself. You want to argue, but part of you knows it's true." Still, he inspires something rare. Faith. Not the kind built in churches, but the kind built in trenches. You remember Lodi, the bridge, the smoke, the madness. That's the image that keeps you loyal. The little man standing where no one else dared. At dawn, you ride out with him toward the countryside. The sky blushes pink over the fields. "You've done it, sir," you say. "You've won Italy." He doesn't smile. "No," he murmurs. Italy was just the lesson, you frown. The lesson for what? He looks ahead, eyes bright as steel. How to command the world. The horse's hooves echo on the stones, rhythmic, steady. Inevitable, like time itself marching to his drum. And as the city fades behind you, you can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end of a campaign. It's the beginning of an empire. The year turns, and so does the tide of destiny. You followed Napoleon through mud, marble, and fire, but now the horizon itself feels wider, like the air before a storm. Paris calls him home, and Italy watches him leave with a strange mixture of relief and awe. The roads north are long and quiet, the horses weary, the banners torn but proud. The men march with full bellies and heavier hearts. They sing as they go, not out of joy but habit, a habit built on victory. You ride close behind Napoleon, who seems lost in thought. He barely speaks, except to ask for reports or to correct a map. Every so often he takes out a small notebook and writes in it with a mechanical calm. Once, when the wind catches a loose page, you glimpse a line. The future belongs to those who dare. He doesn't chase the page when it flies off. He simply watches it drift away into the sky. The army pauses in Milan for one last ceremony. The city square is filled with cheering crowds, merchants throwing flowers, musicians playing fanfares, priests blessing the soldiers as if trying to baptize history itself. Napoleon stands before them, the Italian sun lighting his face, and gives a speech that sounds less like farewell and more like prophecy. "Citizens of Italy," he begins, his voice echoing through marble and memory, "I leave you free, but freedom, like victory, must be defended by courage, not gratitude." The crowd roars. He pauses, looking over the sea of faces. The world is large, and if there is still injustice anywhere, then none of us are truly at peace. Even the skeptics fall silent. You watch him, realizing that he doesn't just command armies, he commands belief. Historians are still debating whether this speech was sincerity or performance. Some say he truly believed in the ideals of the revolution. Others insist it was all theater, an audition for empire. Perhaps both are true. That night, as the army breaks camp, you see him alone near a candle, sealing letters with wax. The flicker paints strange shadows on his face, half light, half darkness. He looks up at you and says, "Do you know what it takes to lead?" You hesitate. "Courage?" He shakes his head. "Loneliness." You don't reply. There's nothing to say. The next morning, the march resumes. Snow begins to fall, soft, silent, erasing footprints as fast as they appear. Somewhere in the distance, church bells toll. The scene feels almost holy. Napoleon rides ahead, cloak fluttering, the tricolor flag snapping behind him. You think of the boy from Corsica, mocked for his accent, ignored by nobles, now returning as the man who redefined an army and a nation. And yet, despite everything, he still looks restless. The convoy stops for the night at a small inn near the French border. Inside, the fire crackles and the air smells of wine and wet leather. The soldiers laugh, play cards, sing old songs. You and Napoleon sit nearby, silent observers of their joy. One young lieutenant, drunk on victory and cheap brandy, raises his glass. To General Bonaparte, the man who makes kings tremble. The room erupts in cheers. Napoleon smiles faintly, then leans toward you. "They think this is the end," he whispers. But history doesn't end. It waits. You nod slowly, not fully understanding, but knowing somehow he's right. There's an odd little moment before dawn. You wake to find him outside, scribbling by lantern light, the cold mist curling around him. You catch a glimpse of his writing, calculations, not poetry, logistics, routes, numbers, dates, plans. Always plans. "Another campaign?" you ask softly. He looks up, his eyes distant. Always another campaign. France is falling apart, and they need a sword to hold it together. And once you become a sword, you forget how to be anything else. You think about that as the horses are saddled again. The road home feels endless. France greets its general like a returning god. Processions, medals, salons bursting with admiration. The politicians smile too widely, clap too loudly. They think they can use him, contain him, make him one of their pieces. But you've seen him on the battlefield and you know. Napoleon Bonaparte doesn't play chess. He is the board. Soon he's given command of the Army of the Interior. He visits the halls of the Directory, where the air smells of perfume and fear. You stand quietly by the door, watching him bow just low enough to be polite, and just briefly enough to remind them who holds the real power. Later that night, he confides in you again. They think they've tamed me, he says, lighting a candle. They haven't seen the fire yet, and just like that you sense it. The next storm building. The man who learned to lead in Italy is now ready to rule elsewhere. The story should end here, maybe, with triumph, with glory. But it doesn't feel like an ending. More like the calm before a much greater tempest. As you pack your belongings, you find an old Italian coin in your pocket, a relic from Lodi, from the bridge, from the days when you were still young and scared and the world seemed too big. You hold it up to the light, and for a moment you can almost hear the roar of the river again. You smile faintly. You realize that the true lesson of 1796 wasn't just how Napoleon learned to command others, it was how he learned to command himself. To turn hunger into drive, fear into clarity, defeat into momentum. And as the lamps flicker low, you think, perhaps that's what history really is. Not a collection of battles and treaties, but the sound of one man refusing to stop. The streets outside echo with carriages and cheers. Somewhere a new chapter of the revolution is being written, and its author has already sharpened his pen. You step out into the dawn mist. The city smells of wet stone and promise. You follow your general once more, knowing you're walking not beside a man, but into legend itself. You've walked the roads of Italy, from the starving marches of 1796 to the triumphal return of a legend. Through your eyes, Napoleon Bonaparte is not just the little corporal, but a living paradox, ambitious and uncertain, ruthless and kind, human and myth at once. You saw how strategy could be poetry, how leadership could be loneliness. You learned that glory demands more than courage. It demands sacrifice, self-control, and an appetite that no victory can satisfy. Historians still argue over who Napoleon truly was, the savior of the Republic or the architect of empire. But for you, he was something simpler, the man who made history breathe. The campaign in Italy was not the end of a war. It was the rehearsal for destiny. So as the candle burns low and the music fades, remember this. Sometimes the smallest figure on the battlefield casts the longest shadow. Now close your eyes, soldier. You've seen enough for one lifetime.